Millionaire didn't know he had a son until he met him at his wife's grave. Imagine standing in the pouring rain, surrounded by silence so heavy, it feels like the weight of 1,000 untold stories. You're at a cemetery, staring at the gravestone of the only woman you ever truly loved. For years, you've carried the guilt of losing her, wondering what went wrong. But today, something changes. Something that will shatter everything you thought you knew about your life. This is the story of David Whitman, a self-made millionaire who built an empire from nothing, but never imagined his greatest challenge would come, not in a boardroom, but at the grave of the woman he once cherished. It's here, on this cold, rainy day, that he meets someone he never knew existed. A son born out of a love long lost to time. David Whitman was no ordinary man. By his late 50s, he had become one of New York City's most powerful real estate tycoons. His name graced billboards across Manhattan, and his wealth bought him influence, luxury, and respect. Yet none of that mattered when he stood before Elena's grave every year on October 12th. She was the light in his otherwise calculated world. A woman whose dreams were bigger than money and whose heart could soften even the hardest souls. But she vanished without explanation decades ago, leaving David devastated and confused. He searched for answers back then, using all his resources, but found nothing. Life moved on, or so he thought, until fate brought him face to face with a truth he couldn't have prepared for. On this particular visit to Greenwood Cemetery, as David knelt down to place white lilies on Eleanor's grave, he noticed movement. In the distance, a young man, roughly in his early 20s, stood nearby, his hands buried deep into the pockets of a worn-out leather jacket. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, though David couldn't quite put his finger on it. The stranger's eyes held sadness, hesitation, and maybe even anger. When their gazes met, David felt an inexplicable pull, like threads connecting them through unseen forces. "Did you know her?" David asked, curiosity lacing his voice. What happened next sent shockwaves through his entire being. The kind of moment where time seems to stop and reality shifts beneath your feet. The young man took a shaky breath and said words that would change David's life forever. "She was my mother." Just like that, the ground beneath David cracked open. The air grew thinner, the rain heavier, and his mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. How could this be possible? Why hadn't Elena told him? Who was this boy? And what did he mean when he added, "And if what she told me is true, then you're my father"? In that instant, David wasn't just a wealthy businessman anymore. He was a man grappling with emotions he hadn't felt in decades: shock, regret, and a desperate need to understand how he'd missed 20 years of his own flesh and blood's life. Nathan Whitman, the young man standing before David, carried his own scars. Raised by Elena alone, he grew up hearing fragments of stories about the man who had once been her great love. To Nathan, David was a ghost from the past, a figure tied to memories he barely understood. Now, faced with the living embodiment of those stories, Nathan wrestled with conflicting feelings: resentment for the father who hadn't been there, confusion over why his mother kept such a secret, and perhaps, deep down, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start anew. Their initial encounter was charged with tension, raw emotion, and unanswered questions. As Nathan walked away into the misty rain, leaving David stunned and speechless, the scene painted a picture of two lives colliding under the shadow of loss and longing. This story isn't just about David and Nathan. It's about second chances, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family. It explores themes of regret and forgiveness, asking whether it's ever too late to make things right. Can a man who spent his life chasing success learn to prioritize relationships? And can a son, raised without a father, find room in his heart to trust again? These are the questions we'll delve into as we follow David and Nathan's journey toward understanding each other and themselves. As David stood frozen in the rain, watching Nathan disappear into the grey horizon, one thing became painfully clear: his life would never be the same. The boy walking away wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was a son, a piece of David's soul he didn't even realize was missing. But how far was David willing to go to bridge the gap between them? Would Nathan give him a chance to prove himself? Or would the wounds of the past prove too deep to heal? And what secrets about Elena still lingered, waiting to be uncovered? Before we continue unraveling this emotional tale, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and join us on this incredible journey. Share this video with friends and leave your thoughts in the comments below, because this is more than just a story. It's a reminder that life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Stay tuned for the next part, where we dive deeper into David and Nathan's complicated relationship and explore whether they can truly rebuild what was broken, or if some bridges are beyond repair. The rain continued to fall as David stood, motionless, the weight of Nathan's words pressing down on him like the storm clouds above. He had spent decades building his empire, chasing success, and convincing himself that he didn't need anyone. But now, faced with the son he never knew existed, all those years of carefully constructed certainty crumbled. The silence between them stretched endlessly, broken only by the soft patter of raindrops hitting the gravestones. "I didn't know," David whispered again, his voice barely audible over the wind. Nathan's eyes hardened, but there was a flicker of something else. Pain, maybe even curiosity. Knowing wouldn't have changed anything back then. Nathan said finally, his tone laced with bitterness. Would it? David wanted to argue, to explain how different things could have been if he'd known about Nathan. But deep down, he wasn't sure. His life had revolved around deals, deadlines, and climbing higher than anyone else in New York City. Where would a child have fit into that? Still, the thought gnawed at him. Elena had kept this secret, raising their son alone while battling an illness David hadn't even known about. How could she not have reached out? Why hadn't she trusted him enough to tell him? These questions swirled in his mind, each one more painful than the last. Nathan turned away, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. "Look, I didn't come here for answers from you," he said, his voice quieter now. "I came because I needed to see her grave." His shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time, David saw vulnerability in the young man who had seemed so guarded. Just moments ago, it struck him then. This wasn't just about anger or resentment. This was about loss. Nathan had lost his mother, the person who had raised him, loved him, and fought for him when David hadn't been there. And David himself had lost 20 years of his son's life, years he could never get back. Before Nathan could walk away completely, David called out, desperation creeping into his voice. "Wait, please!" Nathan froze, his back still to David, but he didn't leave. David took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he began, choosing his words carefully. "But I want to understand. I want to know about her, about Elena, about everything." There was a long pause before Nathan slowly turned around, his expression unreadable. "You really mean that?" he asked, skepticism evident in his tone. David nodded, his resolve firm despite the turmoil inside him. "Yes, whatever it takes." Reluctantly, Nathan agreed to meet David later that week at a small diner near his apartment. When they sat across from each other, days later, the tension was palpable. Nathan ordered black coffee, just like Elena used to drink, and David couldn't help but notice the resemblance. They talked haltingly at first, skirting around the bigger issues. Nathan shared bits and pieces about his life. How he worked part-time at a garage to pay for college. How he dreamed of becoming an engineer. David listened intently, trying to piece together the life he had missed. For his part, David spoke about Elena, sharing memories that made Nathan smile faintly. It was clear that both men were treading cautiously, testing the waters of a relationship neither knew how to navigate. As the weeks went on, their meetings became more frequent. At first, it was awkward, filled with long silences and unspoken emotions. But gradually, the walls began to come down. Nathan started asking questions about David's business, curious about the world his father inhabited. David, in turn, encouraged Nathan to pursue his dreams, offering guidance without pushing too hard. Despite the progress, though, the shadow of the past loomed large. One evening, as they walked through Central Park after dinner, Nathan stopped suddenly and looked at David. "Why did she leave you?" he asked bluntly, catching David off guard. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. David hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed and admitted, "She didn't leave me. I left her." He explained how consumed he had been with ambition, how he had promised Eleanor. He'd slow down, but never followed through. "By the time I realized what I'd lost, she was already gone," he confessed, his voice thick with regret. Nathan absorbed this information silently, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he said quietly, "Do you think she would have wanted us to know each other?" The question caught David off guard, and for a moment, he struggled to find the right words. "I think she would have wanted us to try," he replied honestly. Their conversations grew deeper, touching on topics neither had dared to broach before. Nathan revealed how hard it had been, growing up without a father, how he often imagined what kind of man his dad might be. David, for his part, opened up about his loneliness, confessing that no amount of wealth or success had ever filled the void Eleanor's absence left behind. Slowly, tentatively, they began to forge a connection, one built not on shared history, but on the hope of a future together. But just as things seemed to be improving, a new challenge arose. Nathan received news that he'd been accepted into a prestigious internship program, but it required him to move to Chicago for the summer. The idea of being apart after finally reconnecting terrified David, but he knew he couldn't hold Nathan back. "Go," he urged, masking his disappointment with a smile. "This is your chance." Nathan hesitated, torn between gratitude and guilt. In the end, he agreed to go, promising to stay in touch. As they hugged goodbye at the airport, David felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride that his son was stepping into the world on his own terms, and fear that this newfound bond might not survive the distance. The months that followed were agonizing for David. He threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the ache of missing Nathan. Yet every text message, every phone call brought relief, and a reminder of how fragile their relationship still was. Then one day, Nathan called with unexpected news. He wanted to visit Elena's grave in Chicago. Would David join him? The request caught David off guard, but he agreed immediately, standing beside Nathan at the cemetery, watching his son kneel by Elena's headstone. David felt a profound sense of closure. This wasn't just about healing old wounds. It was about building something new, something real. As they left the cemetery together, Nathan turned to David with a small, tentative smile. "Thanks for coming with me," he said softly. David placed a hand on his shoulder. his voice steady but full of emotion. Always. In that moment, David realized that second chances weren't about erasing the past. They were about finding a way forward, and for the first time in years, he truly believed they could make it work. But as they drove away, a lingering question remained. Could they sustain this fragile bond once Nathan returned to his own life, or would the challenges ahead prove too great to overcome? Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll delve deeper into David and Nathan's evolving relationship and explore whether their newfound connection can withstand the trials ahead. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with friends, because sometimes the most unexpected stories are the ones that remind us what truly matters. As the years passed, David and Nathan's bond deepened in ways neither of them could have imagined. What started as hesitant meetings at cafes evolved into a genuine father-son relationship that felt like it had always been meant to exist. Nathan officially joined David's company after graduation, not just because of their shared blood, but because he truly believed in the work they were doing. Together, they launched initiatives aimed at supporting young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, something Nathan had dreamed of since his own struggles paying for college. It was a way for both of them to honor Elena's memory, her belief in helping others, shining through in everything they built together. But life has a way of testing even the strongest connections. One evening, as David and Nathan sat in the office, going over plans for a new project, David suddenly clutched his chest. Wincing in pain, Nathan froze, panic flashing across his face. "Dad? Dad, are you okay?" He rushed to David's side, steadying him before calling an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors informed them that David had suffered a mild heart attack. While he would recover, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that time wasn't infinite, no matter how much wealth or power someone possessed. Lying in the hospital bed, David looked pale and frail, but there was a calmness in his eyes. Nathan sat by his side, holding his hand, something he never thought he'd do when they first met. "You scared me," Nathan admitted quietly, his voice thick with emotion. David gave a weak smile. "I scared myself too, son." The word hung in the air, heavy yet comforting. It wasn't long ago that Nathan had resented being called anyone's son, but now, hearing it from David, filled him with a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he craved. During David's recovery, Nathan took on more responsibilities at the company, stepping up in ways that made David immensely proud. They spent hours talking about the future, not just of the business, but of their lives. For the first time, David opened up about his fears. What would happen to Nathan if something happened to him? Whether he had done enough to make up for lost time. Nathan listened patiently, then said firmly, "You've already given me more than I ever expected. You didn't just give me your name, you gave me a family." Months later, David returned to work part-time, leaving Nathan to take the lead on most projects. Their roles shifted naturally, not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect and trust. One day, as they stood on the rooftop of one of their newly completed buildings overlooking the city, Nathan turned to David with a grin. "Remember when you told me success isn't just about making money?" David nodded, raising an eyebrow. "Well, I think we're proving you right." The building behind them housed affordable apartments for low-income families, a dream Nathan had pitched and David had wholeheartedly supported. Watching people move in, laughing and carrying boxes, reminded them both of why they started this journey together. As the years went on, David eventually stepped down as CEO, handing the reins fully to Nathan. In his retirement speech, he spoke candidly about second chances and redemption. "When I first met my son, I was terrified, not of losing control, but of losing him again. but Nathan taught me that it's never too late to start over. Today, I leave this company in the hands of someone who embodies everything I wish I had been when I was younger. Compassionate, driven, and unafraid to dream big, Nathan took the stage next, visibly emotional. My dad once told me that success is about making a difference, and while I'm proud of what we've accomplished here, the real difference he made was in my life. He showed me that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. So thank you, Dad, for finding me, for fighting, for me, and for teaching me what it means to be a Whitman. The crowd erupted in applause, but for David and Nathan, the moment was deeply personal. As they embraced on stage, it was clear that their story wasn't just about a millionaire discovering he had a son. It was about two men who chose to rewrite their futures despite the mistakes of the past. In the end, David often reflected on how different his life might have been if he'd known about Nathan sooner. But he also realized that regret was pointless. What mattered was the choice to move forward. Nathan, meanwhile, found peace knowing that his mother's sacrifices hadn't been in vain. She had raised him to be strong, independent, and kind, all qualities that allowed him to forgive, to connect, and to build something meaningful with the man who had once been a stranger. Their journey proved that while life may deal unexpected hands, it's the choices we make afterward that define us. Second chances aren't guaranteed, but when they come, they're worth every ounce of effort. And sometimes, the greatest legacy we can leave behind isn't wealth or power. It's love, resilience, and the courage to start anew. Thank you for joining us on this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like, and share with friends. Stories like these remind us that no matter where we come from or what challenges we face, there's always hope for a brighter tomorrow. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.